where this is always like some kind of like magic witchcraft that you have to perform until this audio equipment works. I have no idea.
I mean, we are kind of like thousands of miles away and somehow video chatting, so it is kind of a bit of a witchcraft, no?
It is, but I just saw your web page, your Instagram page and stuff like that. So nice
Oh,
photos. You're
yes.
in Hawaii?
Thank you. I'm in
Yeah.
Costa Rica right now.
Oh, in Costa Rica. Yeah, of course. You said South America. Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I grew up in the city my whole life,
Okay.
but I think after being in the city so long, I was like, I just need to go and be in nature somewhere. Like I need somewhere with animals and plants.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Similar for me. I grew up at the countryside a little bit, but you know, it's always nice to enjoy nature. I mean, it's beautiful. It's like nothing else matters. It's just being here and being in tune with your surrounding. It's very similar to when you sit in an airplane and you just leave the ground, and whatever you worried about, it's just gone because you can't do anything about it, right? So
Yeah.
the nature and any experience you have for the physical world removes any of your problems or any worries you might have had. Tells you a bit about the state of civilization, maybe. By the way, not that you get like disturbed or anything like that. I have a like how do you call it? It's a tooth replacement because I cracked
Mm.
my front tooth when I played tennis and wanted to run after a drop shot, and I like tumbled and fell head front into the asphalt.
Oh no.
Yeah.
You weren't playing Alexi, were you?
No. Well, Alexi, there's I would have played I would have been playing chess. There's much less potential for injury.
I see, I see. Alexi, he actually I played him once. I played him once. He beat me, but he's it's interesting. Like I've recently redeveloped a love for chess.
Hmm.
Do
Yeah,
you play
I do
much?
play chess a little. Yeah, I play a little bit. I think I never really played against him because I never played it for longer than 2 weeks at a stretch. So I'm like I've never built it up to where I can be like a more professional, but I can hold my own for a couple of moves. Yeah, and I know how the game works. And if anyone
Nice.
wants to play chess, I can say yes, let's play.
All right, all right. The chess club grows. Nice.
Yeah,
Well, hey, where are you exactly? Are you in New York? You are in New York, right?
more or less. Jersey City,
Okay.
which is yeah, basically west of Hoboken. You have the New York City, you have Manhattan, and then you have the Hudson River to the west, and then next to the Hudson River is Hoboken, and then on a like a then there's a slope or like a small like hill, and that's where Jersey City lies.
Uh-huh. How long
Yeah.
have you been there? You weren't there. Were you there in 9/11?
No, 9/11. I was in Dresden doing my PhD thesis
Huh.
in Germany, and I came to Princeton in 2005 at the end of 2005, and then I went to NYU in 2008, I think. Yeah, 2008, and then I moved to Jersey City in 2009. So I've been here for 13 years. Yeah,
Uh-huh. So you were
yeah,
there for COVID, huh? The lockdown?
yeah. Didn't affect me as much because as someone who works from home, it's not that there's not much of a change,
Business as usual.
but business as usual. Yeah, but there's some stores that got boarded up. You could clearly see it. I mean, there's certainly stores that went bankrupt or like just left, or and you had to wear a mask at the supermarket around the corner, and they were enforcing it for a while, but then it kind of petered out. But yeah, a lot has changed. I haven't been to New York so regularly that I would notice a clear change, but even then, it's not the same as before. It's yeah, there's some kind of like pessimism laying over everything, I feel, and
Hmm.
it's difficult to grasp in words, but it's like it feels like it's the darkness before dawn. So I'm a very optimistic person.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
but
feel
yeah.
like there's it's I've been, let me think. I have been traveling. I started traveling like 6 years ago, and then
Yeah,
I've been back to the States for periods of time, like months at a time. I think the longest was for like I went back for 2020 when COVID
yeah.
happened. I think I was there all year. Yeah, that was the longest that I was back in 6 years. I was there for a year. But it's weird to see like when you hear news about the States where all this crazy stuff's happening, like it's difficult to know what to believe, you know? Like I'm in another country, so I'm kind of like I just see what I see in the news and what I hear from talking to people. So it's kind of like I don't know, it's interesting hearing people's perspective that are like there now. Like how much of it is true, you know? Like what is actually going on? How do you so you see pessimism, like what how was it before? How was it? When did this start? Like before 2020, after? Like when did the switch happen? Like what did you
I
know?
actually had, yeah, I actually had in 2020. I actually had a beer with Alexei in January of 2020. It was basically 2 weeks before we had the first COVID case in the United States, and things were very different. You could just hang out with people in public, and there was no worry that you have to wear a mask or you have to like separate your tables from one another. And to be quite frankly, if I see pictures where people have a mask and then take the mask off for eating, I'd rather not go to a restaurant at all. That I rather wait it out until all this is over. Um, and so, but looking at that, or I also love to play music. I played in an orchestra many times, and then you have the woodwind section and the brass section. They have sort of like a mask, and then they cut out a hole in it,
Oh
and
my God.
it's just. I mean, guys, either you wear full on mask or you just leave it be. And it was strange. You could still go into larger supermarkets. You could go and gather reasonably close, and for smaller supermarkets in smaller gathering, there was no mask mandate, or then some city officials came into businesses that weren't
So
enforcing the mask mandate or whatnot. That
so
was
how is it
all like
now?
strange to me. How's
How's
it
the
now?
situation now? Yeah.
So I was counting actually, like last year, you always had like 70 to 80% of people that wore masks. Wherever I would just count on my way to the store. I would just count down like mask versus unmasked, and I always landed at about like 70% masks. And now it's gone down to 30%, but you still have people that wear masks now. I guess it's kind of like a force of habit, and older
Mhm.
people still wear them, but the rest is just gone. And I think politically, some of the Republican states that have very unabashedly pushed back against mask mandates, like Florida, for example, have sort of also set an example, because then people who don't really want to wear a mask would look to Florida and say, hey, you don't really need it. And so then the whole thing has petered out a little bit. So
Mhm.
I feel it's more like, yeah, if you're overly cautious, you'll still wear the mask, and otherwise most people, they don't wear the mask. But it's kind of strange for me to see that the same people who wore a mask and were very religious about wearing it, then like 1 year later, they don't wear them anymore. It's like there's a switch, and people really align themselves to whatever officials tell them to, for good or for bad, and then when there's no guidance anymore, they leave it be. But I'm sure if they put a guidance up again, people would go back to wearing masks. It's interesting how mass psychology works, right? Sometimes, and I'm not saying that in any judgmental way. So I have my own opinion to masks, but in some cases maybe good that you can influence people, like in a small amount of time, very effectively. But it's also a bit scary that on the long run, people just start adhering to something without really questioning why they do it anymore, right? And that
Yeah.
that's the uneasy part to me. I saw people at the store discussing, some of the store workers, that was last year, that when people didn't wear masks, they would endanger everyone, and they were so worried about what other people were doing. And you know, this is just something you cannot change, and yet people are really worried, and they will start, oh, when this people didn't enforce the official guidelines of the government, that is bad because now we all have to suffer. And that's such a strange view, that makes me a bit uneasy, actually, to be honest, because whatever somebody in authority says, people will then just follow. And
Right.
then they will also start policing each other, right? Because they just believe, oh, it's bad for every one of us, so you need to do this, this, and that, what an authority told us to, right? And
Sort of like
yeah,
the collective hive mind is better for the group as opposed to the
yeah,
individual, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And I also think, for example, one thing was never discussed, right? If you worried about COVID spread, and then you find that mask inadequate way, the virus is able to keep on plastic surface for days. They did experiments in the lab on copper. The virus dies away very quickly, but on plastic, and I think on cardboard, it keeps forever, like 2 or 3 days.
Right.
So now people had started to wear gloves, but that petered off very quickly. But people go to the supermarket, they look at that bread or look at it, oh no, put it back, and
Well,
then
people
somebody else
people
grabs
don't
it,
work on
and
logic. People are often run on emotions, it seems. And
yeah, that's a good point.
there's something called there was a term being thrown around. There was this virologist that went on Joe Rogan, and then
Yeah,
there was this term right after that came around called mass formation psychosis, which was this
yeah,
idea where if you take people and you isolate them and then you pump them full of fear and then you just have a guy with an authority figure just saying, okay, if we all do this, we'll be okay, like we'll save ourselves, just do something, then people, it's a psychosis. Like it's not necessarily logical, but people are working on their emotions and then they convince themselves that this solution helps, and then that's how you basically control people. That's like a that's a form of like exerting control over people. It's been happened, you know during World War II. I think that happened. That was some kind of situation
yeah,
where I guess when governments take over, that's something that can happen, I suppose.
yeah. I mean, then people will align themselves. We see it time and time again, and where it really crossed the boundaries for me was when people start, when families start breaking apart because somebody doesn't want to get vaccinated in a family, and then they exclude that person from Christmas, for example. Unbelievable. How can you do that? How can you ever have an outside authority wield a stronger hold over you than your own family? I mean,
Right.
there's also always ways to compromise, right? There's always ways to, I feel a little uneasy and I would be happier if everyone is vaccinated, and but it's your personal decision, but maybe we can then see each other on different days or whatever. You can always find something, but people just align with whatever outside authority tells them if they are just scared enough. And that's the real scary part to me. And that happened, that happened all around. I know it from personal experience. I know families in which that exactly happened.
I guess people are willing to give up freedom for security, I guess, in some sense. So,
Yeah, there was a yep.
where do you think the line is? Like, where do you think, it's like, I remember I had a friend, I was living in an apartment with like 5 people, or it was, I guess, yeah, it was an apartment. And he started coughing, like he got a fever and stuff.
Yeah.
So then we were like, dude, stay in your room. Like, don't cook, man. Like, don't use the kitchen. But then he was like, no, 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 no. And then, he just, so I guess what's the line, right? Like, what's the, how do you see it?
That's an also interesting part. So I got COVID actually in January this year. So, and I felt like very tired all the time, and I got tested. It was COVID very clearly, and I just stayed home. And but then I also realized that some people said, "Oh, okay, everyone is vaccinated. You can just go out and you can just yeah, no problem. We can play tennis there." And I thought, no, I'd rather I'd rather wait for an additional week until I go out and meet other people, right? That's the other thing. I thought like you have a personal responsibility. If you have a cold and you're coughing, you're staying home. You don't go out in public with a cold, right? Or with a fever or with a flu. And that's but then people also just that tell you that you have to wear a mask and get vaccination. At the same point, they say, "Oh yeah, you can just go out in public." That was like very weird to me. That made no consistent sense,
Yeah.
right? Um, but when you ask where you draw the line, I find there's no clear line. There's people draw a line whenever other people tell them to draw a line.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so I guess, well, if
I
in
mean,
my opinion,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sort of like on the side of like I want more freedom, right? I
Yeah,
want less people to tell me what to do, and I want less authority, right? Um, that to me is sort of like what America is about, right?
yes.
I and I'm a U.S. citizen, right? But for example, you didn't grow up in the States, right? You immigrated.
Yeah, I went from Germany to the United States. Yeah.
So what did you why did you come to the States of all places? You know, like you could I guess you could have stayed in Europe. What attracted you to the States?
Freedom, just freedom, the idea of freedom, and that's something that not many people understand. I have relatives in Germany telling me that the United States isn't as free as it once was. It's not like you think. And I think to myself, well, gee, I'm here for like 13 years, and my friends from Germany tell me that things are not as they seem. Well, I'm here, I, I can, yeah, things have become worse maybe here and there, but people think that are outside the United States that they understand the United States, and they just simply don't, right? Um, Other people don't understand, Americans don't understand the German mind. I understand it because I grew up there, but I can't understand what France is about. But I also don't tell people that France isn't as it once was there, in whatever political aspect they have. And this is so strange. I can't really put it in words why I came here. It's freedom. You're free to you're free to succeed, you're free to fail. You can really do your own thing and be left alone. I think that's the most important part. And maybe also, I mean, on my personal life, what affects me personally, I probably have as much freedom in Germany as I have here, but it's the idea on which the country is built. Whereas Germany is built on an idea where you have very regulated, or not, I mean, not overly regulated, but you have things have to work in order. The buses have to come like on the minute, and they really do.
I see.
Right. So Germany has Germany is a very perfectionist mindset, and it's also a very rule-based mindset. And things have to work, and they have to work nicely. And you have to get a lot of certifications and licenses if you want to become a tradesman in Germany, for example. You can't just like go get one license and then start repairing people's plumbing. That's not working like that. So you have to go through an apprenticeship, and after 3 years you get a license, and then you can really operate. It's not the same here. So Germany is much more regulated in that way than the United States is, and that's a different mindset. And if you like that mindset, then Germany is the right country for you. But if you have a basic freedom mindset, you have much different ideas about freedom than people in Germany even have. You see that libertarian ideas that are very normal and almost like mainstream in the US, Germans would be aghast about. Like, how can it be? Like, the Second Amendment for Germans, it's like that they are horrified by it, that
Huh.
people are even exist carrying weapons. But and then when the Second Amendment, in my view, is also there to support the First Amendment, then that's not something like a normal German has on their mind, right?
Hmm.
And so in that way, the US is very different. That we see, the US in something like if you read Murray Rothbard's The Anatomy of the State, that's a very, very that's yeah when American reads that, they say, yeah, sure, that's the government is basically like a cartel or like a corporation, and government tries to control people, and government is seen more as an external force in the US. In Germany, government is seen like we are the government, which breaks down if you think about like bad things that government does. It's not like people that get persecuted in the 1930s. Yeah, they also were the government, right? I mean, then this argument breaks down that we are the government, really,
Well,
because
hold on.
then
So, I guess my question is like, what when you were in Germany, I guess you were as a German, you'd think like, do you not have that perfectionist kind of attitude? Like, what did you have in your imagination when you were thinking of coming here? And then now that you've been here, how did that sort of compare to what you had thought your dream, I guess,
yeah,
dream
yeah.
reality, right?
There was an interesting evolution to me what happened when I came here. For example, I was growing up in the academic area in Germany, and then I was always fascinated by the US, and then I did like an internship in 2002 in Iowa City, and I loved it there. So I thought if you love it for 1 month in Iowa City, you can go anywhere in the US. And I read the book Gödel, Escher, Bach by Douglas Hofstadter, and that was recommended to me. And that reinforced the mindset of you see like long-haired professors in the 70s on campus, and freedom and happiness, and discussing all kind of crazy ideas and stuff like that. And that was like paradise for me. And so when I came here in the US first for good in 2005, 2006, I was very much trying to put a European mindset on top of the US. So I thought the US is just Europe, but maybe a little bit freer, a little bit more opportunities. But
What
I
is
thought the
Europe?
rest is pretty much Europe.
What does that mean exactly? I'm not European. I haven't
Yeah,
been to Europe. So what does that mean to you?
a European. It means that you have all the universal health care. You have like all this like universal, basically just yeah, universal healthcare is one thing. Um, it's a good question. What's the European mindset? Um, I think I felt like in that point was like being in academia, but more opportunities, more the minds were like a little bit open, a little bit more open. And being academia mind means discussing crazy ideas, but always having some sort of basic social net, having health insurance, like social insurances. Um, I was actually really puzzled that there's nothing like a in Germany you have to have an insurance that if you topple like a vase over at a store, then your insurance pays the $200 you just cost the store, or something like that. Something like that doesn't really exist here. If you drive a car, yes, but not like that. So I was more safety minded in my mind, and I was basically, to me, the US was like a friendly, safe space with larger opportunities than you had in German. And I was growing up in a very very sheltered academic environment, and so that's what the US was to me. And then I got confronted to with libertarians, which I never really had heard before, and I was intrigued though. For example, there was one very, very, very interesting moment for me. There was shortly after Obama was elected, you had a Ron Paul rally they showed and interviewed people about the Constitution. I thought, oh no, those are these strange rednecks I heard so much about. They all say there's nothing good about those. Let's see what he has to say. And I thought then the guy was saying that was talking about the Constitution. I thought, well, wait a second, this guy has an enormous grasp about the Constitution. Wow, he really knows the stuff. And then I thought, yeah, but all white guys. And then the camera was panning over, and you saw a black dude with an AR-15, and that was like shocking to
America.
me. I thought, well,
Yeah.
can that be right? And and um and that kind of like set a seed in my mind, but I wasn't like pro Tea Party or anything that came up then. Then in 2009, the Democrats pushed through the universal health care, and I thought, finally, people have health care. You had all these horror stories of people that can't afford the cancer treatment and stuff like that. I thought, finally, that's been taken care of. Great. And then somebody told, I had a Republican colleague, and she was talking not very favorably of Senator Ted Kennedy. He was like really one of the key figures of putting health insurance through. And she recommended me to read Atlas Shrugged. And I read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. And that also, that put a lot of new ideas into my mind. And so that was, some of the ideas were difficult to grasp for me, but the more I looked at these concepts, the more libertarian minded I became myself. And I think that's the evolution. And now I see that you cannot really understand, you cannot compare the German mentality with the American mentality. I think you cannot even compare the German mentality with the Anglo-Saxon political mentality. Germany is all about we do things together and they work, like Prussian precision, like a Prussian military that was like the hallmark of precision. You have people that are proud that they're public servants. They're really proud in Germany. They're happy public servants. So the state is never seen as the enemy in Germany, whereas the Anglo-Saxon mindset, I think, and the American mindset is seeing the state much more as a separate entity, whereas in Germany the state is more seen as being integrated with everything else. And one funny thing when I discuss with friends and with German friends, one thing that we never seem to get on one level is so these friends are very fond of privacy. Privacy is very important, and I can talk to them about abuse of privacy. But then, to me, then if one part of the government is abusive, then the whole government isn't to be trusted. But that's just one branch of government that misbehaves. The rest of government is essentially good. And that makes no sense to me logically, but to them it does make sense. And I guess that's one of the difference if you come from a German mentality where you think the state is really very integrated, we all are the state, we all are together. Then you see there's some black sheep that behave inappropriately, but the rest of the government is great. Whereas if you see the government as an external entity, then you see one mistake and then you say, okay, that's enough for me to know that we shouldn't trust government at all.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds about right. Okay, so before and after, do you sense that you accomplish your goal of finding more freedom here, like of the long-haired professor? Were you able to come here and have a symposium with a bunch of academics and discuss freely all topics?
Oh yeah, I always enjoyed discussing academically, but once it became time to become a professor, I lost my will to do so because I felt niched in. I was working on zebrafish angiogenesis, brain angiogenesis, which is very important. Zebrafish is just a model organism, but many of the brain development parts are very similar to how human brains develop, and understanding how the blood vessels are growing around the brain and into the brain to support the brain with nutrients and oxygens later on. That's a very important field. Understanding that is very important. But I still felt I was too much niched in. So I thought, in science, there's like 4 or 5 other people that understand what I'm doing, and I'm not reaching a larger audience. So I went out of science, and
all right, sorry, 1 second. Sorry to interrupt. A lot of information here. So you are a professor. Are you a professor?
I'm not a professor. I could have been a professor. At the point when I would apply for professorship, I left academia.
Okay. So you were also doing research.
Yeah.
Are you still doing research, or you were doing it before?
No, I was doing it before. I'm not doing research anymore.
So you were researching neurogenesis, which is basically rebuilding the brain, essentially, like the brain creating more new connections, new neurons.
Yeah, for example, I was focusing on the blood vessels that, if you want to understand, that people, for example, if people have a brain tumor, it's important to understand how the blood vessels grow because they support the brain tumor with nutrients. If you want to get rid of the brain tumor, you need to understand ways to get rid of the blood vessels. For example, people get aneurysms in brain where blood vessel just breaks or bursts, and then you need to understand, maybe some blood vessels, maybe they have weaker walls than other blood vessels. And to understand the blood vessels, you need to understand how they develop. I think that's the most straightforward ways to understand something. You want to see how it's created. And the advantage of zebrafish is they are transparent, so you can basically and the blood vessels support the brain after 2 days. So you basically get a large part of zebrafish embryos. You just watch them develop with a microscope, and after 1 or 2 days, you can watch how the blood vessels grow into the brain. That's what I did.
Zebrafish.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
So
wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. What did you learn? What was the conclusion of that experiment?
we learned that there was a gene called RECK, which is a gene that is upregulated in many cancer, especially cancers that are progressing into later stages. And this gene
Upregulated?
actually,
Sorry.
upregulated. Okay, so the gene is switched on, or let's say in general, it shows abnormal activity in a lot of the cancers, and so we thought that this gene regulates. This gene is responsible for regulating the blood vessels, because if it has an abnormal activity, there's like a crazy overgrowth of blood vessels. That's basically what we found. And we found that it's not just like some crazy overgrowth everywhere, but that if we have a mutation, we had a zebrafish that didn't have the functioning RECK gene. And we compared that zebrafish without that gene to a control zebrafish, and then you can see, okay, the differences between the blood vessels in both fishes, in both versions, that is probably what that gene is responsible for. And we found that without this RECK gene, certain blood vessels weren't developing at all. And so I characterized that, and we found certain the role that RECK plays in development of these blood vessels is probably switching on some signal in the cell that makes these cells grow.
Okay.
So that's what we found. Yeah.
Wow, okay.
And the interesting thing about that was that it was very, very specific, right? It was a very specific subset of blood vessels in the brain, not the entirely blood. The rest of the fish was fine. In the front of the brain, blood vessels were fine. Everywhere else in the body, blood vessels were fine. But just in the back of the brain, those blood vessels weren't there. And so that gave us interesting new insight. Also, if you think about it, that means that there's a curious sharing of work between some genes are responsible for blood vessel development in the back of the brain, some genes are responsible in the front of the brain, in the mid of the brain, and it's really interesting to characterize all that. And that's what I basically started to develop. But for some reason, I couldn't see myself being a professor at that and really pushing it forward, because I felt I was too much in a niche, and then I would really do my thing without anybody else really knowing anything about it. And so I stepped out of academia. But does that make sense? That was what we were working on.
Yes, definitely. That's wild. So a gene malfunction is basically connected to like a certain growth of blood vessels in a certain part of the brain, basically.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So sorry. One moment.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear
Great.
me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. I have so many questions. Okay. So you're basically a geneticist then. You're studying genetics.
Yeah. I do.
You said you got a PhD.
Yeah.
That was in Germany. What was it? What was the title of that? What
in Germany was about a different gene, also zebrafish, and in Germany I was just studying early development. And basically, when fertilized egg is starts to divide, right, and then becomes 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, 16 cells, thousands of cells. But if they just divide like that, you end up with a ball of cells. But in the end, we really are not a ball of cells, right? We have a front, a back part, and so on. And so what we found happens is that this ball of cells reorganizes itself in a process called gastrulation. So if you think about the sphere of cells, now the cells start to stream to one side, and then they start intercalating here, and that's how you get from a sphere into a rod. It's called convergence and extension, and that's basically how you turn a sphere into a rod. And that's a process we studied in very early development, which is also fascinating because if you think about it, like one egg that fertilizes and then develops and divides, and who tells the egg where the brain cells will later be, which cells become the heart? As far as the egg knows, all the cells are exactly the same, and that's something we studied. There's like very intricate regulation mechanisms, very intricate networks that basically first specify whether your cell becomes a brain cell, like a nervous system cell, or whether it becomes muscle and bones, or whether it can become like lung and kidney and stuff like that. And then you do specify it further down. So basically, the Mother Nature takes it from the large subdivision into domains, into smaller subdivision into domains, and then cells also have to move to get at the right place at the right time. It's really quite fascinating, and
Wow.
it's very aesthetically pleasing because you watch cells that move. And my duty was to characterize a process. We also had a mutant
Wait, you
where
can
this
actually
gastrulation
watch the
process,
cells replicate like in real time? How is that
yeah.
even possible? What is that? How quickly do
So
they replicate?
you have a microscope, and you basically um, at the beginning imagine the zebrafish egg just like one big sphere of yolk, like a chicken egg. And then all of a sudden, one cell emerges from one side of that yolk. So you have one cell transparent on top of like a yellowish yolk. And then that cell, there's a little cleavage furrow that appears in the middle of the cell and divides the cell. Now you have two. Now each of these two cells gets a cleavage furrow here, and now you have four. And then it goes like that. Cleavage furrows appear, and then you have 8, 16, and so on. And each division takes 15 minutes. So you can actually watch it in real time. It's a little bit tedious because it is very, very,
Oh
very
my
slow. But
God. Wow.
yeah, but what we did was you have the embryo under a microscope, then you take an image every minute, for example, automatically, and then after an hour you come back and you have 60 images. You basically have a time lapse, right? And then you can watch it as a movie as fast as you like. And and it's
That's fascinating. How do you
yes, it
take the
is.
embryo out? I mean, the thing's like
It's
sawdust, right?
the embryo is in an eggshell called chorion, and that chorion is sort of like little flexible. It's like a thin sheet of paper, and there's some kind of jelly inside, and then you have the embryo itself. But if you really want to watch it, you need to take it out of that eggshell. And so what you do is you take how do you call this, squeezer? You basically pliers, and then you grab the eggshell with one plier here, with the other plier here, and you carefully pry it open. It's
Oh
more
my
like you
gosh.
pry a little hole into it, and then you took the other plier and put in, and then you kind of carefully put it open like that. If you do it too fast like that, then you completely squeeze the egg. It's very fragile, so you need to be. So that took me about a month to really learn to have this like fine motorical capability to take this embryo out of the eggshell. But once you can do it, you can do it very quickly and very with very soft hands, and it's satisfying in and of itself.
That's fascinating. Did you know that
Yeah.
you'd be doing that when you signed up for the PhD in the beginning? You'd be
Sort of a little bit, but I've never worked with model organism in when I studied biochemistry, so that was new to me. And one important thing I also learned on my first day, basically, when I had the interview with my principal investigator, like when I applied in March 2001, so he showed me a movie of cells of control. They were just moving in a certain direction. And he showed me a movie of the development of the mutant that he had, where the cells weren't moving in the specific direction. And so when I then started in the lab, I said, "Oh, that's cool. Like those cells move, the other cells don't move, right?" And he said, "Well, it's not that easy. The other cells still kind of move, but not as efficient as the cells in control." And so right away, I learned that also there's few phenomena in nature that are really black and white. Usually it's somewhere in between. And the important work, or the real significance of my work that I did there, was to tease out which process actually is important here, right? We found that the gene that we're looking at was responsible for aligning the cells with the direction in which they were moving. So these cells had like a front part and a back part, and if the cell wants to move there, the front part needs to point there and the back part needs to point there. If it doesn't, if the cell points there and wants to move there, then it's very inefficient movement, right? So I was able to quantify that, to basically show to basically quantify the axis of the cells and show that this needs to be aligned with the movement direction. And that was the internship I did in Iowa City. There was a lab that had software with which you could actually analyze the movies that you took and do these mathematical calculations. And so for 1 month, I was working on that in Iowa City in that lab.
Wow. Okay. I so many questions. All right. So okay. That was the last research that you did, basically.
And that was the research I did in Dresden. Then I did a research stint in Princeton, where I did work on similar processes in Drosophila embryos, which is the fruit fly embryos, and they develop in very different ways to zebrafish, but there were very important similarities between development in fly cells and in zebrafish cells. And then I almost got married, but my girlfriend at that time then went to Columbia University, and I moved in with her in New York. And so then I moved to New York at a point where I didn't, to be honest, my work in Princeton didn't really proceed as much as I wished it to. And so I had still 6 months on my stipend, and I thought now is a good time to move, not just wait until your stipend runs out, but move now. And I applied to a different lab, to that zebrafish brain angiogenesis lab in New York, and I got hired there.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you moved to New York. You're doing the zebrafish, and then was that was that the last research that you were doing before you said you reached this point where you were trying to figure out whether to be a professor, and then it got too niche?
Yeah, yeah, that was the last point there, and I think it all started. May have already been starting in Princeton. So many things that we think in our lives that, oh, there's the turning point, but no, the actual real turning point came a couple years earlier, right? I wasn't really finding a way to see myself as a professor, I think, and so I was lacking the optimism to drive myself forward, and to really start to push hard to get a professorship position. Ideally, I would have started that after 1 year in Princeton already. I mean, it's the real estate of just the email address at princeton.edu is crazy. I didn't realize it at that point, but with that email address, everyone answers you. I casually asked another professor in Germany, actually Nobel Prize winner. I just asked him about some things I saw in a meeting, really not that important, but he immediately replied. And people don't realize that there's a thing like if you are part of an elite university, I'm sure it's the same for Yale.edu, Stanford.edu, that opens doors. It really does. So I only realized later on that I didn't leverage it as much as I could have, but it was still good enough to get me into a good lab in New York. But already in Princeton, I had lost my drive a little bit, and so that just came more and more to fruition. I still finished the time in New York with I think 2 papers, and I could have used them to apply. But to be honest, those papers could have also been in better journals if I had put myself more into it. And yeah, I think it was just at just one point I just felt now it was really time to leave academia.
Okay, well, quick question. So you said it was too niche. The research was too niche. Can you explain that a little more?
You know, when I work on the gene called REC in zebrafish brain angiogenesis, but there's just like 3 or 4 other labs who work in brain angiogenesis. Then I saw myself interacting with those labs, maybe 1 or 2 more labs, but I would always be a guy in the lab and I would have no contact to the outside world much, and nobody really would understand what I'm doing. I mean, I can explain it and all, but nobody would really see me. I didn't. I guess I felt like I wasn't bringing any value to people. I was working on a very niche project, similar to somebody who there was this Reddit kind of heartbreaking post by someone had it on Reddit. He has a PhD in philosophy and was working on Husserl, that philosopher, and nobody is really interested in works about Husserl, but he has like very very deep expertise on Husserl, but he doesn't find any job anywhere, and now he works at some fast food joints to make ends meet. Got to send you that link. That's actually hilarious and saddening at the
I
same
see.
time,
Uh-huh.
right? And I felt in research was a little bit similar to that. When you want to go to a pharmaceutical company, um, they they want you to have very specific expertise. For example, liver development in mice to understand liver disorders, or skin development in rats, or all these different things, or developing methods for automating workflow in biomedical companies, something like that. They can hire you for specifically. I know many other people at Skirball Institute at NYU, where I was, that got hired by a big pharma company, but they worked then as a medical writer, so they weren't really hired for what they actually did research on, right? And that's how I felt. I'd niched myself too specifically. I know one friend of mine from Dresden, he did analytical chemistry. He did a project that was very heavy on many different methods and analytics. And for example, that would have been a smarter choice for me if I want to make myself more presentable for industry, right? So if anyone wants to keep their options open, wants to go into science, that's great. But if you really want to keep your options open, I would recommend doing something like tool development, or method development, or
Right.
something that is that can actually be used by a pharmaceutical company. Don't just go into research doing anything and then hope that you will be hired through the board. That's not the case.
Okay. Well, quick question. So you said that if you were going to be in the lab, you wouldn't talk to anyone. You wouldn't, you'd be kind of like isolated.
Yeah.
Was that the same situation if you'd become a professor? Um, Seems like you'd have students. Wouldn't be completely.
Yeah. That's a good point. Maybe it's a personality flaw of mine. Maybe I've let myself get too down by the idea that I'm too much niched in. There's also there's a ton of different areas you can go into as a scientist.
I
And
guess
I didn't really
here's
make an
sort of
active effort to do that,
sorry.
to go into that.
My what I'm trying to get at basically is, say I'm the perspective of someone who's I never got a PhD.
Mhm.
I'm a customer of academic composition, and I'm trying to figure out, because you have a PhD. So I'm like, oh, okay, let's see if it makes sense for me to get a PhD, because these people are just
Mhm.
constantly, trying to get more degrees. So what I'm trying to figure out is, how did you come to the logic to get a PhD? And then once you have your PhD, what are your, I guess, career options? And then why, I sort of, what are you doing now? And then why didn't you go in the other trees? And then what are you doing now? And then sort of, what is your like goal? Like before you die, if you were to finish some work, what, as a geneticist, you probably want to contribute in some way, some
Mhm.
project. So I guess I'm sort of trying to figure out, as a third party, like the journey and the logic.
Yeah. So that's a good point. My initial thought was I wanted to become a biology professor or biochemistry professor. So I never really considered the non-academic alternative. I just wanted to, for me, it was clear I wanted to go to research, and so it didn't really matter what I did. Anything that I had fun with could be good research. So I was going there.
You just
Um,
wanted to study weird, cool things, basically.
yeah, exactly. And so, but then but you're studying biochemistry. That's what I did, 5 years. Then I did a PhD in Germany, it's an additional 3 to 4 years. Then I did a postdoc, and then add 3 years. So you're basically doing 10 years of schoolwork, and you are going to be a completely different position, a different person with 30 years than you were with 20 years. So the person who started to do that journey is not the same that came to the conclusion, what should I do now, right? And I didn't realize that at the time. So um, any recommendation to people, that's something you should keep in mind. So I think um, so what people should look at if they want to have a degree is, what will your next step be? Where do you see yourself working? How much money do you need per month to make a good living? Because you can always do if you want to be a scientist, you can always do things on your own. You can have a little hobby lab in your garage. Nobody prevents you from that, right? Or if you want to become a Husserl scholar, nobody prevents you from buying all the books and studying on your own, right?
Uh,
um, I think you should really also look at what your skills are, not just what your passion is. What are you good at? What is something that can give you money from that? And that is something that I didn't think about, and that's something that I have to think about more now. So what my personally for the future, I probably try to do expand my freelancing work a little bit more, to branch into other areas like video editing, for example, or copywriting, something like that.
mhm.
So, and maybe I can help people that are working in science, and then I would be able to help them. For example, a freelance microscopist, that would be really great if I can just go to join a lab for 2 weeks and help them with some microscopy part of their project, because many labs don't have that expertise on hand, and they don't really need to have someone with that expertise. To but the reviewers told them in this paper you need to have some microscopy. So how do they do that then? So they could hire a freelance microscoper, for example. That's something I could do, right? So basically, that's things I'm looking at. Those are things I'm seeing myself at. I think attending more to freelancing than going back to corporate America, or to the corporate world, whether it's academia or um, or like a for-profit corporations. Um, it's just a different. Maybe it's just not my. Maybe it just can't function very well in the corporate world, but
It
nothing
seems to be a
wrong
common theme
with that
with
either.
most of the people in academic composition.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah. I mean, you're free. You can do your own thing, and
once you have
that is
freedom,
worth
it's like
more
you
than
can't go
additional
back.
money.
You know, it's like once you're free, it's like tough to be like tough to go back to the corporate world, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a mindset switch that you have to do, right? Now, then somebody all of a sudden is there, and you have to ask them for permission to take a day off next week or something like that. Um, but I think there is a way back if you have been a freelancer and you want to go back for a year or so to corporate America. If you want to make more contacts, for example, if you want to have more contacts in your area, then area of expertise, maybe it's a good idea to be in a company for a couple of months or a year or so, because then you can make contacts in person, and then add that to your company that you want to start. For example, I could see
Right.
that.
Well,
But
okay.
going to a company just for this, like, go company, stay there for a while, have a house, marry, have kids, and then retire, that model doesn't work anymore.
So two questions. What is like a real world example? Because I'm like imagining in my head some idealistic. I just want to study chemistry. I want to like, you know what I mean? I could see that like a college student entering college.
Hmm.
But then, what? How you said you changed when you were 20 and 30? Can you give an
Yeah.
example of that? Like how, you know? Basically, an
For
illustration of
example,
what you're saying.
when you're 20, you good question. I felt completely different at 30. I guess one thing is that you are willing to put up with a lot of you can live from mac and cheese, from microwave. You can live with 4 people in one apartment to save costs and stuff like that. At
Right.
one point you want to buy a house, you want to have your car you drive to work with. At one point you want to have more comfort. That's one thing you want to have when you're 30. But also you uh, you can't just look at additional work of additional being a student for additional 10-20 years. When you're 20, you're fine with just studying. If you're of that mindset, you go to academia, you love it, you do more of it. But at one point you want to also just be a person in charge who actually directs other people. You want to be more managing more people, because then you have more freedom. Producing content is great, but at one point you know you also want to maybe you want to delegate more content that other people produce rather than produce it yourself. You want to be able to be more efficient. You're asking yourself, where are you going to go? What do you want to do with your life? And if you're just writing text or standing in the lab like every day, that's just not cutting it anymore. So
I
that's
see.
one thing in which I changed. Um, and and very importantly, you become more worldly. So I think that was the biggest change. Now that I think about it, you
Hmm.
can go live like a monk for a while when you're 20, but at one point you want to have like a normal life as well, right? You you know you don't want to live in the cloister forever, right? You don't want to do that. I mean, some people maybe, but it's a big risk, right? You don't know whether you're that person at the age of 20. So chances are that somewhere between the age of 25 and 30, you say, okay, enough of that. I now want to have my own family, and I want to make my own decisions, and don't want to be going to school every day.
Right.
That's something I changed. And if you stay in science, you're going to school every day. Now, if you have somebody who wants to study chemistry and really wants to see himself doing chemistry all the time, that person I would recommend to look into, um, let's say the guy is interested in organic chemistry, and yeah, if you study engineering, like chemical engineering, you will have not only the ability to do chemistry, but you also learn how to wield your knowledge about chemistry into constructing real machines. Like, as my chemistry teacher in high school said, it's very satisfying if you drive by with your family, and you see like a refinery on the right side, and you can tell your family, hey, this is the refinery I built. So that is very satisfying also. And that's also a difference. With 30 years, you want to be the one who says, this is what I built, not this is where I worked for the last 10 years.
Oh, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Okay, so what are you doing now? What are you up
I'm
to
now
now?
doing. I'm now working for academic composition, helping people with basically from everything, from homework until from homework on one side to PhD thesis, helping them with statistics
Hmm.
and stuff like that. So statistics, data science. I feel I also have a good background on that. So I'm more specialized on the technical stuff. I'm not the person you would ask to write a PhD thesis about Husserl or help with that, right?
Right,
To
right.
stay with that example. So, but there are other people who are really good at that. But that's on me. My strengths are more in terms of the science and STEM area, and
Hmm.
yeah, that's what I'm doing. And I'm also doing some video editing. I've taught myself that a little bit. I can also do economics. I probably indirectly have taken several economics classes now. So I can read a 10K statement, I can read a balance sheet, and so I can do that. I can do consulting, and I'm trying to branch myself out a little bit more. But right now I'm working for academic composition, and yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
Just
on the
blasting
STEM
out
aspect.
assignments, helping people with their papers.
Yes, definitely,
Awesome.
yes, yeah.
What are, like, let's say, three of your most or your favorite some of your favorite paper subjects that you've written about recently.
My favorite paper subjects are cybersecurity. So basically, there's something called penetration testing, which is basically a method where you act like a hacker and you try to intrude on a business network. And they do that. It's actually required by law that companies do pen tests, because then you can basically see where the weaknesses in your security network, right? So that's why. So basically, you hire hackers that try to get into your network. And other cybersecurity stuff, I like that. Math is something I like a lot, and biology. That was most what. Let's see what I did most of the time lately. Yeah, I think accounting. I actually have found fun doing accounting. And chemistry, biology, and cybersecurity. I think those are the three areas: programming, cybersecurity, coding, cybersecurity, programming. I like that a lot. And accounting I also do like, because I like working with numbers, and anything that's to do with chemistry and biology or biochemistry. I like that. So basically, one important aspect I saw is becoming a programmer is actually also a really good deal for people that are thinking about that, because you don't have to put a lot of, I mean, it's writing, but you don't have to put a lot of fluff on the pages, and you get paid very well for that. Just because supply and demand is, there's many more essay writers that you can find than people that can actually help you program something. So
Right.
programmer is certainly, if somebody wasn't really clear what he wants to do, and that's something I haven't really thought about. Thanks that you bring that up now, that made me thought about cybersecurity, all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You need coding everywhere. In biology, you need to do bioinformatics. You need to be able to go through the databases, like analyze proteins, genes, and everything. Cybersecurity, like Python programming, data science, through the board, you need programming, and it pays very well. So anyone who likes computers should give that a go, because you get paid very well, and it's a satisfying work. You don't write too much fluff.
Mm-hmm. That's an
Yeah.
idea. That's an
Yep.
idea. Okay. So cybersecurity,
Mhm.
biology, and accounting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're writing papers about that.
I'm writing papers about that. I'm also doing some programming here and there,
Uh-huh.
like Python, R. I mean, you can go to Udemy and you can get these courses, like, and I don't know, 30 hours of Python, and you get the entire Python, and then you basically can dedicate like 1 hour per day. You have done it in 2-3 months, and then you can go on sites like Kaggle or some other sites where you can actually look at projects. You build your own portfolio map
Mm-hmm.
or web page, and then you basically find customers. Or, and I heard that works also very well, is doing a boot camp where you learn programming like in an intense way, and then you
Mm-hmm.
get some sort of license, and often you also get industry contacts already, so that you are pretty certain that you get hired.
That's an interesting point. So continuing education. So
Yeah,
you basically went bachelor's and then straight to PhD, or did you get something in between?
I think I went to master's and then PhD. I think in Germany, it's not Germany. You don't have like bachelor or master's. You instead have have a diploma that you get after 5 years, which is similar to master's, and then you do a PhD. And
Okay.
it takes a bit longer in Germany to get the diploma, and then the PhD is a little shorter. So in the US, you can get your master's in 2 years or 3 years, and then you make a 5-year PhD. And basically, that's the other way around: 5-year diploma, 3-year PhD in Germany. But
Okay.
yeah,
I see. So when did you decide, okay, I'm going to go for the full PhD? How did that work?
I think I decided that when I started to study biochemistry, it was always there. I always wanted to do that. That was always my ulterior goal. And when I went to some literature, some journal clubs that got actually only confirmed in my mind. And then yeah, no, time it was when it was time to look for a PhD, I looked for a PhD, and basically I had some good people at university that wrote me nice reviews. So that's also very important, your network. And then from then on out, it wasn't too difficult to get a PhD after applying to a handful of labs.
Nice. So once you finished your PhD, um, how was your mindset? Like, how did you feel before and after? Like now that you finished, was it like some kind of like big like accomplishment, like a huge weight relief, like lifts off your back, or were you just
Yeah.
like, oh, another day, or and then
Well,
do you still use the connections from there? Like, how does that, what do you keep with you? What did you keep with you
so
after that?
interesting. I actually already applied for a postdoc when I wasn't yet finished with my PhD, so that I could directly jump from the PhD into the postdoc position. And
Uh-huh.
that's normal. That's what many people do. You don't want to have like, if you stop your PhD, then you start looking, it's kind of like a gap, and you also lose the network that you have, right? In Dresden, I had a network of people that could actually write me a recommendation, and I could go apply for a postdoc, and I could basically say, I can, if you take me, I can be finished in 1 year, and then I can come over. But still, nevertheless, and I also made sure that I had publications during my PhD. That's also important to get funding later on. Um, but so I already had accomplishments with papers. That was publications. That was a great, that was important milestone for me. But I still remember after I defended my thesis, next day I was just sitting in a garden somewhere in Dresden, and I was just enjoying the sun. I was just saying, this is now finally, this is my first big goal. I have achieved that. I'm yeah, that was a milestone. But then
Nice.
after 2 or 3 days, maybe after, let's say after 1 or 2 weeks, then you mentally move on for the next step.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it was a big achievement. But I had made so many smaller achievements, so that this just felt like a small next step, an important step. But I always try to go from once. You always want to frame your life that you go from one success to the other, right? You don't want to. You want to feel nothing, and then all of a sudden there's some success. You always want to be
Little wins, little
little
victories.
wins, little wins, exactly.
Yes.
Just yeah.
Nice. Okay. So I guess coming up to the last questions. Do you plan on working? Well, one, where do you think genetics research, like where is that heading? Like what is the future? What's like the cutting edge? And then two, do you plan on circling back in at some point? Somehow, you know?
Yeah, good questions. The first question, the cutting edge is in personalized medicine. Now they can analyze your genome analyze your DNA in 1 hour basically. And so they can do that. And now the problem is that you now have a huge amount of data. So what to do with that information, right? And you now use artificial intelligence, machine learning to figure out the genes that somebody has, how much is somebody now predestined to develop certain diseases, for example. It's rarely the case. I mean, they found in the 60s and 70s, when the concept of DNA came up, they were finding that for certain diseases, there's one gene that's mutated, and so you can basically test people whether they have that mutation, and then you can take precaution. For example, there's a disease called phenylketonuria. That those are people PKU. Those are the kids that have that. They lack one gene that allows them to digest a certain amino acid, and if that is not taken care of, they will develop mental problems. But now, if you test for that, then you can set these kids on a specific diet for a couple of years, and then they're completely fine. But
Wow.
most diseases aren't just like one gene, one disease. It's like you have a plethora of genes that work together, and then the whole DNA is very variable. So it's like our DNAs would be very different. The important genes are the same, but there are very many variations. And now you have to figure out, like from 1,000 genes that contribute to a certain disease, what are the variations here? Is that person, how much is the likelihood of that person to develop a certain disease like diabetes? Or how likely is that person to get an addiction if they start smoking or something like that? And that kind of personalized medicine, which also allows you to basically develop the very specific cocktail of drugs that somebody should get who is sick, right? Um, that will be cutting edge, and that will be something personalized medicine and understanding, what the best nutrition is, what the best treatments are, using machine learning and artificial intelligence. That's the cutting edge in biology and genetics, especially right now.
Wow.
Um, and so that's something. Yeah, I think I could do that. I don't know much where microscopy fits in there, but I could see myself cycling back to that industry when I understand more about bioinformatics. I took some courses for machine learning, and I started to do some machine learning. So I understand the basics. If I really want to go into that, I can do more machine learning and then specialize in bioinformatics. Then I would circle back into areas like that. The question is if is that something that I would like to do on a professional level, or is that something that's maybe just on a hobby level? So that I have to figure out. But if I ever circle back to science, it's probably going to be either as a freelance microscoper or something with bioinformatics and machine learning. Yeah,
Nice. All right. I'm curious to follow, see what you do.
I'll keep you updated. Yeah.
Great. Well, hey, any last words for the academic composition customers? Any tips, advice?
Well, just always be optimistic. You are like academic business, like everything else. You have to look at it from an optimistic point of view. Maybe something let's get you down. Maybe this the task seems to be hard or whatever, but you get through it, and then afterwards there's something nice waiting for you. I would always try to always be optimistic, even and if there's a lot of things that put you down. Here's one thing that you can do if you don't know where to start. You just look at what you have to do and what your situation is, and you find the things that worked well, and then you find the things that you want to make better. And then you think about ways how to make them better. And that's something that has always helped me through life, and that will also help you if you try to get bogged down with your academic studies. Yeah.
Do you have like a quick example of like a real world example of that?
Yeah, for example, there's like a lot of different for example, all of a sudden you have three different exams to do, and you don't know really where to start, right? So then you can just sit down and you can look at which subject are you already pretty knowledgeable about, right? And maybe then you can do that on your own, and maybe there are other subjects that you're not really that familiar with and you don't have that much time to learn about it. Then you can ask us for help, or you can maybe look at it and say, oh, okay, this exam is due tomorrow, but the other exam there's still 2 weeks left. So it's always tougher if you it's always good to take a deep breath and look what is actually there in front of you. And if
Great,
you need help, we can help.
great. All right. Well, hey, it was a pleasure talking to you.
All
And
right.
I have so many questions still, but we've already done like almost an hour and a half. But you
Yeah,
know,
feel free to ask me anytime. I'm happy to
sounds
answer.
good. Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've talked to many PhDs, so it's just like